This is the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Jason, and today I am joined by my co-host, Lowell Francis. Hi, Lowell.
Hey, Jason.
All right, so we are doing our June gaming roundup, talking about some of the games we've played. Lowell, how was your June?
Well, it was pretty good. One of the things, of course, that puts a huge sort of mark in the middle of it is this was Origins, and Origins Games on Demand is a big thing. It's Sherry and I's big yearly convention. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I want to talk about what I ran there. It's off Gauntlet, but it's sort of related because it's something you and I have talked about before, games that we're working on. And I showed off Hearts of Wulin there, which I'll roll back to in just a second. And I want to talk about Origins because it was dynamite. So the games I did this month, though, off Gauntlet, I did Blades in the Dark. We did our action cards game of OCI, where we're actually doing some pirate stuff, which I hadn't done before. The Veil, I started with some people who hadn't played PBTA at all. I started a face-to-face Hearts of Wulin game, and the one game I got to play at Origins was Cortex Supers with Mad J. Brown, and he's actually going to be running that.
Yeah, I saw that. He's running that on Gauntlet Hangouts. It's pretty exciting.
It's neat. It's Cortex, which I'd only played once, so it was good to see it in the hands of kind of someone who really knew it. And of course, I love superheroes.
And that was the stretch goal. Didn't he write part of the stretch goal for that or something?
Yeah, that's actually his product that will be coming out as part of the big new edition of Cortex. And it looks neat. He's got a really interesting frame for it. I don't want to spoil it too much, but he did some very neat things with how the game generates dice and aspects and building up your memories, which was cool. On Gauntlet, I did the last part of Impulse Drive, which was the Star Wars Saturday game, which was really good, and I got hit hard in the feels there. I'm wrapping up. I have one more session left as we're recording this of Blades in the Dark, Aruvia, and I'm really disappointed because session 11 of 12 didn't record, apparently, and everything blew up at the end, like the city, like everything changed for session 12. So that's a big disappointment to me. But I also have been doing Worldwide Wrestling, which remains the best game, and Apillion, which last session felt like a Miyazaki film and was really amazing. So, what a great June.
Awesome.
Yeah. So went to Origins. It's a convention in Columbus and pretty much spent my time at the Games on Demand area. I'm part of now the advisory board for that. They've made some changes there. Evan Torner oversees it. He did a good job handling things. And of course, Jason Cox, who's also part of the Gauntlet, is on that committee as well. Met a lot of cool people face to face. Introduced myself this time, like Sean Nittner and James Mendez-Hodes, who has written some amazing stuff for 7th Sea and has done this 1,000 Arrows game about, I think, Sengoku, Japan. So just really sharp. A lot of Gauntlet people there. Victor Wyatt.
Seemed like it, yeah.
Yeah, Steven Descharzan, and a lot of people. I'm not going to be able to name everyone who was there. The Alexanders, John and Pam. Anyway, I took Hearts of Wulin with me, and I want to talk about what that is. I've mentioned it before. We've done it before on the show, but I want to kind of come back to it because it has kind of changed in my conception. But I want to talk about how I took it to the con, what it looked like, the reaction, and some things I learned from doing that.
Well, we haven't really done a deep dive on Hearts of Wulin either.
Yeah, I think we've just skimmed it. The last time I played it on Gauntlet, I had a really good crew. I had Fraser, I had Matt Weatherby, I had Michael Barford for the first of 2 sessions, and I had Agatha, who knows this stuff.
And she's so goddamn good. I just say that every time. She's
she's really good.
One of my favorite players right now. I love when she's at my table.
Right. No, she's solid. She knows the stuff. She has an appreciation for the genre. And it was kind of a solid validation for me that she enjoyed it, that she had a good time. So this is a PBTA hack that I've written. It is based on, the pitch line that I give is this is sort of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, meaning that we've got these relationships, but we've also got action and we've got melodrama. And the relationships and the interactions and the pain and the soap opera-ness is as much a part of the play as sort of boots to the face. And my bigger inspiration comes from Chinese soap operas, which are actually based on pulp novels from the 50s and 60s. I've talked about this before. There are tons of them out there. If you have Drama Fever, a subscription to that, they have a bunch of shows of these Chinese soap operas that are really wonderful these days. And it is a game where we're not doing the point-by-point combat. It is very much you get to color and tell how you're awesome rather than we're digging down into the heavy mechanics of combat, which is very different. I've run a lot of martial arts stuff in the past, and this is so much more satisfying because you get to say how cool you are, and we do it very quickly, and we resolve what the fight says to the story.
You know, I find in games where fighting is, and by fighting, I mean like hand-to-hand fighting or like small arms fighting, right? I find that in a lot of role-playing games, particularly traditional role-playing games, the momentum gets sapped almost entirely by the mechanics, right? I mean, like it's a common problem. And so I'm curious to see like if, how you have handled that and kind of what Hearts of Wulin does to flip the script on that.
Yeah. And that's been, one of the things I know for myself is when I do run the trad games, that is where I'm cutting away, is I'm cutting to make those combat sections faster and faster so that we don't lose that momentum. But let me talk about what the game itself is. We've got 6 playbooks, and each one represents a very generic kind of role. Like we've got the loyal character. We've got the character who knows things, who's called the aware. We've got the student. So there are 6 of those, but each one has a choice of 3 different archetypes. Like if you're the loyal, you might be a magistrate. That's a particular kind of loyal. Or you might be a swords person, a person who's really studied the sword for their household. If you're one of the gallivant, we've got the favored eldest, who everybody expects to inherit. Or we have the person who just travels around drinking. We've got all of those kinds.
It's a great word, gallivant. Yeah. I love that.
We've got, if you pick your role, you get a move from that. Of the 3, and then there are 8 other moves, and you pick 2 of those, standard PBTA style. So you've got some choices. Some of those are built fresh, and a lot of those are adapted from other material right now. The big thing is that I've stolen from the best. So I've stolen from Masks, I've stolen from the Veil, and I've stolen from Fate Accelerated. So rather than having stats, you have Qi, and they're the different Chinese elements, and they kind of represent approaches. So metal represents concentration and reflection and calculation. And much like in the Veil, you kind of choose your mood to roll in. You're sort of choosing your thinking and your approach when you go to roll. You get to choose what you roll, except for your combat. If you're going to fight, you always have a style element, and it always sticks. So we've got 5 stats, very simple. You get to pick what it is. And the thing I say at the table when I'm introducing this is, why wouldn't you always roll your best stat?
It's a thing, yeah.
Yeah. So the way I do harm is that when you take damage, when you fail a roll, if you're going to take harm, you actually mark the stat that you rolled with. So you've only got 5 stats, and if you mark a stat that you rolled with, and then it becomes locked, you can't roll with it anymore. So there's a kind of a risk benefit that goes on with those stats, and it makes for some really interesting, quick decision making at the table about whether you want to risk doing this in a particular way or how that shapes the fiction. And that's been fun because it then generates a quick economy for people supporting and helping each other to clear conditions. As Masks does, it generates that interaction. This does much the same thing. So I'm digging how that's worked.
Cool.
So that's sort of the most mechanical part of it. I also had listened to a lot of the Zhang Hu Hustle podcast. They have a background in Savage Worlds and a lot of other really interesting games.
It's Eric and Eli's show, right?
Yeah, so good. I've mentioned it before.
I need to listen to it. Yeah, I need to listen to it.
They're good. They're good approaches. If you find a movie that you've seen and that you like, they will tell you something new about it.
Cool. They're part of Misdirected Mark, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, man, so I can't snatch them up. So.
Yeah, no. And they have a Patreon, too. So they talked about different scales and different levels of fighters in their podcast, and it had been something I'd been thinking about, and they really helped me clarify that. Basically, when you're go to fight, there's one of 3 ways. If you go to fight a foe, either the foe is below your scale, and in that case, you win. Unless you roll terribly, you're going to win. And even if you roll terribly, you're going to tell me how you win at a cost. So you're going to beat foes that are lesser than you. Mooks are much the same way. If you're fighting a group of mooks, they're usually below your scale. So you roll, and only if you mess up, you have a choice of, okay, do I actually, take the fail and get XP, or do I do as a cost. If someone is on your scale and all the PCs are on the same scale, then there's a standard roll and let's see what happens, and we resolve the whole fight.
I love this. Like, you haven't even finished, and I love it. This is so cool.
The fight is just resolved in a single roll, and we get to describe it. And then one of the things is describe how you won awesomely. And if someone is above your scale, you lose. Period.
Okay.
Then you roll to see if you get to tell me how you lose.
What is if you don't mind me interjecting real quickly, like somebody who might be above your scale, is that like an individual, like a David and Goliath situation where like the David has no chance of defeating the Goliath? Or is it like a big professional group or an army or something? Like, what is the typical bigger scale thing?
So groups of people are always below your scale, and the players can bite off chunks of those. But what it is
like mooks, right?
Yeah. In these films, you fight a superior foe and you lose. This is it. Someone you just can't beat.
It's a genre convention. Got it.
It's a very strong genre convention. And there are two ways that then we handle that at the table. The mechanic for it in a longer term game is that once you've faced someone and lost, then you have to go away and figure out how to beat them. And you have to go and develop a new technique. You have to go and study, and you have to give me in the fiction what you've learned and how you've trained to come back and fight them. And that move you actually roll with the number of times you face them. So it's really in genre. At the table, when we do kind of a one shot, I will say to them, this foe is above your scale. You're going to need to do things, to change things in the environment. You're going to need to get assistance to bring him down to your scale.
That's good. Yeah, I like that.
Becomes a really good mechanic, and it helps me divvy up the attention at the table, because I'm very much, when I go to run these games, okay, I want to make sure everybody has somebody that they get to interact or do something with. So we have enough mooks, or we have enough named foes, or we have a big foe that you can help somebody to defeat. And so there's a little bit difference in terms of how I handle it, the one shot versus the longer, but that paradigm holds true across the board.
It's awesome.
There are two other big changes. One is entanglements, which I'm going to come back to. We've talked about this before, about doing entanglements in triangles, that I love X, but they love Y, and all the relationships are in triangles across the board. And then the other thing we do is I do a very open version. There's a study move just to keep things simple, but we don't have set questions. But you can ask about a person, you can ask about a situation, you can ask about someone's scale, or you can declare a major change in the fiction. And this is something that I really like, because we're always given permission in PBTA to add things to the story. But for example, when Fraser played, he rolled his study action, and I said, you could declare something major, something that changes the plot. And he said, well, I'm studying my sister. I think she's actually an assassin for this group. And I was like, okay, nice. Let's go with it. And like, it's a thing I would always let players do, but the mechanic there gives players real control and authority and recognition that you should be doing this. You can swerve the story.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like that. David Laviniere, my co-host on Discern Realities, he's running Cold Ruins of Last Life.
Yeah.
That one of the Magpie joints for Dungeon World, and it has a really cool version of spout lore that is like that, right? Like this really like player focused, like player facing lore creation aspect, which is really cool. Like I'm always a little like, I'm kind of a more like, I've got it all figured out kind of GM, so I'm always like a little leery about mechanics like that. And indeed, spout lore as written in Dungeon World, that's not how you do it. But I increasingly like stuff like this.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that Sherry has pushed me to do is with those moves is to say, you can declare something about this. You can make a declaration, or you can ask me to do it. And if you ask me to do it, I'm going to give you something positive. But I think you should always have kind of an escape valve for the players who are like, I don't know what I want.
I think that's smart. Yeah. That's very wise.
And that's a whole PBTA thing that we could talk about. And actually, Fraser and I just, when I first met him, had a long discussion about this. But I think that's really important to have some easy choices there. Anyway, so that's all the mechanical bits. And the game is in pretty good shape. So I took it to Origins. I ran 4 sessions, and I had 4 players in most of them and 5 players in another one. And I did It's a 4-hour block. I did an hour of character creation, hour and 15. I had a little sheet that we worked through, like a map, a list that said, here's what we're going to do. Everybody had a copy of it so they could all work through at their own pace, but I could also point people to where we were at. And we had time where we built the entanglements, we built the relationship map, and I had a couple of whiteboards on the table. And so I would draw out and write out names. And so we had everybody's names and little lines, and it really worked. Part of what had helped was I did these image cards for characters, and I had pictures on one side and then example names on the back. And so I dealt out chunks of the deck to everybody during that process so they could look through and find pictures for themselves and their NPCs.
That's smart. Yeah, that's really good.
The other thing I did that I think is worth thinking about for PBTA games at a con is I didn't want to put all the entanglements, like the choices of those on the character sheet, because that eats up real estate on the layout. Instead, I did them on cards, and then I randomly dealt them out to the players, and they had to pick one romantic and one general. So I dealt them 3 cards. They picked one. It took it off the table, and it gave them something to look through and then write in. And it was really, really useful.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great.
And we got all that. We took the break after building all this stuff up, and we got great stories every time. We got great, solid beginning, middle, end stories in all 3 sessions. I got nearly every NPC and entanglement and relationship. I got them on the table. We changed them. They meant something. I felt really, really good about it. Kept things moving. We had some great moments, like at the very end, I had one player, everybody else had kind of succeeded, and she was fighting her former master, and she rolled snake eyes, and I said, well, what's the cost? What's the cost here that you're going to pay for this going on? And she hesitated, and I said, I know what it is. And I said, your lover leaps in front of the blade and takes the blow for you and dies.
Yeah.
And like 10 minutes before that in play, she had said, I think I've interacted with this NPC. I'd kind of been hesitating. I think I'm going to commit to him. I am going to marry him after this. And I was like, delicious. He's dying at her feet as she finishes off her master. So good moments. We had a couple of Pathfinder players at one of those sessions.
How'd that go?
Great. It was like nothing they'd ever seen. They had no idea. And they came away going, oh my God, I can't believe how much we got done. I can't believe we told the whole story.
Oh my God. Like when I was first running Dungeon World back in the day with like people who at that point had never even heard of Dungeon World, right? Much less played it. They came from D&D and Pathfinder, especially Pathfinder, and same reaction. Like, holy shit, we did like half the dungeon in one session,
Well, and you will appreciate this particular line. We got done with this Thursday night session, and the 2 Pathfinder players were like, "Oh my gosh, this is like nothing we've ever played." And I had Victor Wyatt at the table. I also had Hans Messersmith, and the one guy goes, "So, do you guys like write for television? Because I felt like I was in a writer's room while we were doing this."
That's good. Wow, that's great.
No prompting. Got that line.
I need to go to fucking Origins and blow people's minds. Oh my
Seriously.
God, what am I doing hanging out at the Dex cons? Jesus Christ.
I want to talk about some takeaways I had for the convention. I want to say this. We don't do a lot of prep for planning for the game in terms of laying out plots or anything like that. I completely freeformed it. We do this at the Gauntlet. But I think one of the things that's really important at a convention is, even if you're doing that kind of light prep, really do your physical prep. Have your laminated sheets, have the nice character sheets, have handouts, have physical stuff to work with. It's such a huge thing because so many people don't. It really helps set the bar. And I think that's once again demonstrated to me. Everyone was super impressed. They felt like it was a professional product, and they were surprised when I said we'd only been working on it for a few months.
Dope AF. I'm so into this. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited to try Hearts of Wulin. I'm thinking about running it probably in September. That's what I'm looking at.
Sure.
I want to run it. And because even though I'm not like super versed in this genre, I love everything you've described here. And I like the melodramatic themes, and I like the sort of like cinematic combat. That's all stuff I'm into. And so I feel pretty good about being able to run it, I think.
Oh yeah. I think it would be not a problem. You understand a lot of what the source material is. I learned a lot of things. I added a new playbook that's the Unorthodox that has some potentially comedic role in it. And I think you have to be careful with that. You have to set the margins. Pam Alexander played that in the first session, and she came back and played again because she wanted to play it more serious the second time. I learned some things about how I want players to, how I have to explain how chi gets marked and how when I want to go to inner conflict. So inner conflict is my steal from Monster.Hearts. Essentially, when you're confronted with your entanglements, when something of those heartaches comes face to face with it, you have to make that roll to see whether you stay strong or flee. And
nice.
That's something that I think I need to talk with when I actually do the rules, is talk about when you make the choice to actually go to that move. Because, you have it down in Monster.Hearts. I have to figure out where it falls in the context of this game.
For sure.
Yeah. There are other things that I learned. Not a lot of changes, but a lot of subtle things. And I'm just now starting to see, because we've only played this now, maybe a dozen times total. So I'm still seeing moves I haven't seen at the table and seeing how they play out. And that's been a very cool learning experience. So yeah, I walked away super happy. Like, I can't imagine how it could have gone better for me, where I was so satisfied. Every session was invigorating. I walked away from every session jazzed and energized, and everyone seemed to have a great time. Even where there were weak spots, I think players still had an awesome chance to try things out. So I'm loving it.
Awesome. So glad to hear that. Cool. Anything else you want to say about Hearts of Wulin?
No. I'm just, I had a couple of little people who played with me email me to ask to see the material. So I'm hoping I'll get some other people trying it out.
Always a good sign. So my June was a little less packed than last June or last month, just because I did not have a convention I went to. So, it was just regular old Gauntlet Hangouts games. I played 2 different series of World of Dungeons. The first was World of Dungeons, The Golden Poppy Trading Company. That was a Yunsuin-based World of Dungeons game. I also played World of Dungeons, Tomb of Horrors. That might be familiar sounding to you. I have a lot more to say about that on Fear of a Black Dragon coming up, but I don't have anything to say right now, but there's a lot to say on Fear of a Black Dragon, so go listen to that, listeners. I also played Monster of the Week, a series I was calling Liquid Satan, but was just more of the same old mysteries I always run for Monster of the Week. What I love about that, though, is I can put something on the calendar that I've run a million times before, and my regular players, or the players who always rush to get into my games, don't rush to get into those. Mm-hmm. And so I always get newer players in the games that are my greatest hits or whatever. And so it's kind of fun because I get to show those off to brand new people and play with brand new people. So that's an advantage of doing that.
That's a very good idea. I hadn't thought about the implications of that.
The game I want to talk about, though, is my game, The Between. I have mentioned it briefly on the cast before, and I gave an exclusive to German podcast 3W6 about it, but it looks like we're going to beat them before they get that episode out. So, so much for that. But I've mentioned it briefly before, but I've never really talked about it in any kind of depth. And unless you were one of the play testers, it's not entirely easy to even see what is going on in the game, because I've only made the player facing materials available, not the GM facing materials. And the GM facing materials and some of the support text is really important to the game. So The Between is essentially about a group of monster hunters in Victorian London. It's inspired directly by the TV show Penny Dreadful, as well as the comic book series The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, as well as British horror classics like The Picture of Dorian Gray and Frankenstein and things like that. It's called The Between for several reasons, but mainly because the characters exist in this kind of liminal space between a mysterious past trying to catch up to them and a very dark, tainted future that they might be looking forward to. It's also called The Between because the players, probably more so in many games I've played, the players exist between kind of living behind their characters' eyes and very directly directing the fiction, right? Down to details in the room, right? Very, very player focused. Almost like the players are co-GMs essentially, right? In a lot of ways. So a basic mechanical overview of the Between. It's a heavily modified Powered by the Apocalypse game, largely inspired, in terms of the mechanics anyway, by World of Dungeons, Monster Hearts, Night Witches, and Blades in the Dark. Those are probably the games that most influenced it. I say a modified Powered by the Apocalypse game because it dispenses with a lot of common thinking and assumptions behind Powered by the Apocalypse and incorporates a few mechanics that I think are quite novel, actually. And also, I think the text to this point very much reflects the experience of someone who has run and played a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games, as opposed to appreciating PBTA in a more theoretical sense. And so I think that while it's PBTA, I think it's going to have a different feel in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. There is a day-night phase structure. That's the Night Witch's influence there in part. The night phase is hyper-focused and visceral, and it's all about sort of the hunt, so to speak, on the streets of London, right? The day phase is more casual, with the scenes mainly being framed by the players, and typically what's been happening is they kind of explore social conflicts between each other and do sort of like daytime appropriate research activities. The game uses a small set of basic moves. In fact, at any given time, there are only 3 basic moves available, and playbooks with moves of their own. There is a sheet called Hargrave House. Hargrave House is the base of operations for the group. And there's also a very extensive GM structure that is essentially my way of GMing a game, but codified and like sort of recontextualized a little bit. And so that's kind of the basic mechanical, framework or the structure of the game. There are a few things that I think make the Between special and worth checking out. And I'll run through some of those. The main thing, or the first thing I should say, and probably the most important rule in the game, is that you may never speak about your character's past, either in character or out of character. You may never speak about it. It is an absolute hard and fast rule. If a character asks you about your past, and you should, and GM characters will as well, you have to demur or otherwise avoid the conversation, right? You may never ever speak about your character's past, except in some instances, which I'm going to talk about. There is a mechanic in the game called the Janus Mask. Janus is a two-faced god, always looking into the past or the future, right? And in this game, it's a sort of metaphor, but it also is it's kind of like a luck mechanic or a stress mechanic in a sense. Every playbook has a list of options called the Mask of the Past and the Mask of the Future. And together they make up their Janus Mask. The Mask of the Past has instructions for doing different types of flashback scenes. Okay. So it'll say flashback to a time when your character did X, flashback to a time when your character did Y. And you can mark the Janus Mask and do the thing it says in order to get a better result on a die roll, right? It works kind of like luck and Monster of the Week. So whenever you mark it, by the end of the session, you have to do that flashback. It ends up being a very cinematic thing. Like we sort of just basically kind of like stop the action to watch this player sort of like go back and give us a scene that gradually begins to reveal where their character came from and kind of what their character's deal is. So I have an example if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm very curious because I want to hear how you've got that framed.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the Mask of the Past for the Mother playbook. There's a playbook called the Mother, and their whole thing is, this is the Dr. Frankenstein inspired character. Their whole thing is, in addition to all the different things that Hargrave House is getting up to, they are secretly assembling a child, so to speak, a person from body parts, right? And their Mask of the Past kind of leads up to like why they might be doing this, right? And so I'm just going to read all of them. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there are 8 options or 8 things. And whenever you mark one, you always mark them in order for the Mask of the Past. So the first is, you lost someone very important to you. Who were they? Name them. Pretty straightforward. Narrate a flashback to the first time you experienced love for the person you lost. Narrate a flashback to the happiest day you shared with the person you lost. Narrate a flashback to the time you had a terrible fight with the person you lost. Narrate a flashback showing how you and the person you lost eventually made up. Narrate a flashback to the time when you first realized you and the person you lost weren't going to be together forever. Narrate a flashback to the time when the person you lost was slipping away from you. Narrate a flashback to the time when you finally said goodbye to the person you lost. And so throughout the course of sessions, and I imagine that'll probably take about, the game is meant to be played over the course of about 12 to 15 sessions. That'll be kind of revealed. And so that's kind of how that goes. Some of the other playbooks, like there's a playbook called The Vessel, and their whole thing is their whole life they have had dark entities kind of living on the periphery of their vision, right? Kind of always in the background or next to them. And indeed, at a certain point in their childhood, they began having sex with them. And it's all about like them living with these dark entities and how they gradually decided to embrace these dark entities and sort of like welcome them, not only like to be around them, but like to be literally inside of them, right? That's the vessel aspect to it, right?
Well, I was going to ask, so the 12 to 15 sessions, that's a pretty ambitious, because for most PBTA and that we've seen run, it's, 1 or 2 sessions, or even we're going to play 6 sessions and that's going to be a solid thing. So what made you decide to go that direction?
I think it was because I wanted it. Like, I think I was kind of, I've been kind of like, I've done this sort of like, okay, we play 6 sessions and we're done with these characters. I've done that a lot. And I just think that there's space to do more. And in fact, the GM side of it like really supports that long-term structure. I'll talk about some of that stuff in a minute, but basically my original thinking was I just wanted something more longer term campaign, right? I was like, can PBTA do this? What would it look like? How would you support that many sessions, right? I suppose you could reveal a lot of these things faster, if you were just like rolling really poorly or you really wanted to hit the Janus mask, like that's within your power, right? But my feeling is even if you only play it for 4 or 5 sessions, and even if we only see little bits of the character's past, that's okay. That to me, there's like something about leaving it unanswered that I love, right? That's kind of where that came from. Now, having said that, on the GM side, there are very specific procedures for running it as a one-shot or a more contained series.
Okay.
That's all still kind of in development, but it is possible. The other part of the Janus Mask is the Mask of the Future, and there are fewer options, but they all have to do with things like happening right now. And oftentimes when you mark one, you either there's a possibility you're going to retire your character in a certain way, right? So going back to the mother, a lot of the Mask of the Future has to do with this creature they're building and whether the creature, once they're animated, is a horror, whether they love the mother, whether there's a circumstance where it can kill the mother and it becomes a threat in the game, like that kind of thing. Yeah, so the Janus Mask is it's working out really great. Like it's working, like in playtests, people are really loving it.
Nice. I'm very glad to hear that you're finding that the players are embracing that.
No, it's like the first time someone does it and it's just kind of fun because we all just get to sit and kind of listen, because they've probably been thinking about it for the better part of the session or whatever, right? And so they finally get to like say the thing, and so it's always kind of a fun little moment, time to show off,
That's a very interesting, I just want to stop here because you're hitting on something that sometimes is we don't have good release valves or windows into headcanon sometimes. And I really like this idea that we have tools on the character sheet that say, you're going to be thinking about headcanon, you're going to be coming up with these things. Here's a way for you to bring that into play.
One of the things Fraser said, I think actually he wrote this in a G+ post and was very, very complimentary, and I was very happy to read it. But he said that the nice thing about the game so far is it really manages your cognitive load. The game is in so many different ways, like manages your cognitive load at all times so that you kind of are doing your best RP. Lauren said something similar too. She's like, I've never felt so confident about narration and role playing because like this game, like the way it focuses you, the way the structure moves your thinking, really, really kind of like creates that space as opposed to, and normally in a role-playing game, it's very like, like you said, there's like this headcanon stuff going on. There's, maybe a lot of chatter about backstory and this and that. And it's all just kind of like a melange, right? It's all kind of mixing together. And that can be great and exciting. The Between is not that game. The Between is like very like you're thinking about specific things at specific times and you always know what you're supposed to be thinking about. So the other thing I want to talk about as far as like things that make the Between cool, there is a procedure called the Overseen. It's a made up word. I looked it up, but I like overseen, so I'm sticking with it. The idea, so in the day phase, the players have a lot of control over the scene framing, and the GM can't end the day phase until at least every player's had a chance to frame a scene that they want to. The night phase is different, though. The night phase is governed by this thing called the overseen. And in the final game, the overseen will be presented, the various overseens will be presented as a deck of cards with different things on them. But right now it just exists as a Google Doc. But the idea with the overseen is while the characters are on their hunt, we cut between the hunt and a scene of something else going on in London in another part of the city that same night. Has nothing to do with what the hunters are doing. It is just a sort of cinematic, like, this is what's happening in London right now. And the real clincher is the way you get experience at night is when you do what's called an echo in the dark. So the overseen is divided up into like 4 or 5 parts usually. And you do a bit of the overseen, then you have a scene with the characters. You do the overseen, you have a scene with the characters. Once it's all done, the night phase ends immediately. Then echo in the dark is when you describe something in your narration that thematically or visually matches with something in the overseen or vice versa.
Nice. Oh, that's wow.
Yeah, it's the fucking killer tech in my game, all right?
That's a really amazing idea.
And whenever we do it, the players are like, fuck, this is good, right? And it's the part that I'm most excited about as far as like, whenever I see players doing it, I can see how excited they are by doing it. It makes me happy. So one of the overseens, my favorite one so far, is, so in London at this time, there were these like sort of guidebooks that took you to all the best whores in London, right? And like they had descriptions of them and you would like take this little guidebook and you'd walk around London and visit whores, right? Well, I have an overseen that's like a boy horror one, right? It's Madame Morvaine's, oh God, I can't remember the name of it, but it's got a cute little name. Anyway, it's like Madame Morvaine's boy horrors, something and something, all agape for your pleasure. Anyway, but what it is we see this person who's like, guy whose ship has just like, entered for port of call and he's traveling to all these different boy horrors, right? With his copy of Madame Morvaine's under his arm. And every new overseen piece is just like visiting a new one of these boy horrors. So one of them is very femme. And so the players have to describe like femme elements in the scene, right? Another one is dying of consumption. Another one's there against his will. And so it's very like, my paint the scene technique that I talk about a lot. It's very that, like with the players informing like the elements of this overseen. And then we dive into the regular scene, and maybe in the overseen, we saw the guy who was dying of consumption. Maybe there was a description of a blood soaked towel in a bowl, right? Or something like that. And then in the regular scene, a player might describe something red in a bowl or like a cloth soaked in blood, right? So that's kind of, it's very cinematic. It's extremely cinematic. Like it feels like you're watching like HBO or something, right? Like it's got this very like cinematic quality to it. And, it's working great. I'm really excited about it. And what I love is the overseen text is made available to the players. They know they're going to have to do it. And so again, the cognitive load of like what they're expected to do, it's like all very managed, right? It's like, what you have to do. You have to you're going to be responsible for talking about this, and you're going to be responsible for incorporating those elements into your scene and so forth. So the overseen is super fun. Very excited about it. There is a move that sort of is the single principal main move that you roll. There's 2 different versions of it, one for the day and one for the night. And this move it doesn't seem like much, like on paper, it seems really simple, but I put a fantastic amount of thought into both of these moves. Okay. Like I thought about them so hard. They are basically just the do something risky move from World of Dungeons. That's essentially what they are. Or actually, they're really closer to keep your cool in Monster Hearts 2. Mm-hmm. But essentially what the day move and the night move do is they are a sort of catch-all PBTA, sort of like 2d6 plus stat move with low result, mid result, good result. And that's all very like what you would expect. But what they do also is they help negotiate the stakes of what's going on, as well as negotiating who has narrative rights. And so I'll read them both to you real quickly. The day move. When you do something risky, name what you're afraid will happen if you fail. Then roll 2d6 plus an ability score based on the action you're taking. On a 10 plus, you do it. Describe what it looks like. On a 7 to 9, the GM will tell you how your actions would leave you vulnerable, and you can choose to back down or go through with it. If you go through with it, the GM describes what it looks like. On a 12 plus, you do it to great effect. The GM will tell you what extra benefit or advantage you receive. Describe what it looks like. That's very close to the Monster Hearts move, and it's somewhat close to World of Dungeons. The Night move is a little different. It's essentially the same move, but it's more dangerous. And so it reads, when you do something risky, name what you're afraid will happen if you fail. The GM will tell you how it is worse than you fear. You can choose to back down or go through with it. If you go through with it, roll 2d6 plus stat. On a 10 plus, you do it. Describe what it looks like. On a 7 to 9, you do it, but there is a complication or cost. The GM describes what it looks like. And you get the same 12 plus benefit one too. So that's working great because the night move especially solves a common PBTA problem, which is sometimes as the GM, it's hard to figure out what those complications should be. It's hard to figure out what the miss should be. And well, both moves really, they ask the player, what are you scared of right now? They tell you, and on the night move, you actually have to say how it's worse. But in any case, the player is involved in helping set the stakes, right? And that's really powerful so far.
I also like what you're doing in terms of both the stakes in terms of, okay, day, night, are also affecting then the role that we're going into. That's very clever.
Yeah, and it's working out really well. I'm very happy with it. These are and honestly, these are the parts of the game that I kind of knew would work. Some of the other things are still in play testing, but these are the things that I was pretty confident about. The other big thing about the game, I guess, the last thing I think that makes it special is the way the GM threat structure works. So every threat is of a type, okay, or there's like a sort of a type of threat. So some of the threats so far are the vampire. That's always the first threat. There is the face taker, which is like a sort of urban legend serial killer threat. There are other types of monsters, other types of killers and things like that. There's a coven. There's like a werewolf. There's all this stuff. And what you do though is instead of everything, each of them has a threat sheet. Instead of the threat sheet telling you like what it is, it's basically just a list of questionnaires, right? And it's several little small questionnaire blocks. And as you answer them, what you're essentially doing is interrogating the threat and kind of what it means. And you're interrogating like, what is the threat? What does it do? What does it look like? What's its next move? What's its next move after that? Is there a way of resolving the threat without destroying it? Like all that kind of stuff, right? You're answering all these questions. And this is the part that needs to be play tested by other GMs. But ideally, the way it's going to work is you have like a mind map, right, of your threat, right? And you kind of know how they should operate. And then each of them has establishing questions that you then pose to the players when the threat comes into play. And you go back in between sessions and you change your questionnaire answers to reflect the answers to the establishing questions that the players gave you. That is my way of GMing. That's literally my way of GMing, like on paper, right?
Neat.
And so that's the part that I'm in love with from the GMing side, but I don't know if it works yet. So we'll see when it goes to open play testing, but that's a cool thing. There's also this other thing called the enemy. And the enemy is like a sort of uber threat, right? They are the big, big bad. They're always a Moriarty style criminal mastermind. And you actually can't even encounter them until a few sessions in, and they are revealed in a very structured way, session to session. And you also go back and occasionally adjust your threats to take into account whether the enemy is connected to them somehow, right? And so what this looks like in play is you have the map of London with all your districts and things, and you have several active threats at a time. And the hunters can investigate any of them they wish. You always give them a little recap at the beginning of a session to like where each threat stands. And if they ignore a threat, you are directed to hit them hard with that one for ignoring it and so forth.
Gotten a lot of amazing tech going on.
Thank you. And it's going. The part that I don't know about yet and that will require maybe more playtesting, but also definitely getting into other people's hands is The success of the playtests, and they have been very successful so far, I don't know how much of it is down to just, I know my game and I know how to run this genre, right? Like dark, sexy, bloody, Victorian, monster hunting. That's kind of my jam, right? I don't know how much of it's down to that. My hope is that the structure will help other GMs get to the same place. I don't know yet. But as far as like the Overseen and the Janus Mask, which were the two big pieces of tech that I don't think I've ever seen before in a game like this, at least, that's working great. And I know it is because I can see the players' faces. So like I can see how they react to it and how they're doing.
Awesome.
So, so I've done 12 playtest sessions so far with 3 different groups. I just want to say thanks to like all the awesome people who've been playtesting with me. That is Agatha, Fraser, Tyler, Spencer, Patrick, Simon, John C. and John A., Lauren, Ellen, Michael, and Steven. Yeah, it's been really, really cool.
Awesome. It just sounds so good.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't have anything else to say. Why don't we go ahead and go over to looking at the calendar next month?
Okay.
All right. So, Lowell, what's looking good in July?
Well, there's a lot that's looking good in July. I will say, just to put this on the table, that July represents the start of Gauntlet Quarterly, the 3rd edition, which will be Worldwide Wrestling, running all through the 3rd quarter. I just have to advocate for that. More Gauntlet League wrestling. But Darren Brox, who I've just had a chance to play with a couple of sessions now in Blades in the Dark, is running the Spire, which looks super appealing to me. It's that sort of urban fantasy punk game that's done by Grant Howitt. And I can't wait to see those sessions. I hope he's recording them because I really want to watch them. It looks like a cool game. I want to see how it plays.
Awesome. I am looking forward to, well, I am very, very happy about, I myself don't get to play in them, but I'm very happy about Dan Lewis, my co-host from 100 years ago on this show. I'm happy that Dan has brought back Story Game Sunday. He's got a lot of cool games coming up. And it's already been going for a little bit, but he's got games going up for July as well. I'm really happy about Until Dawn, which is one of my favorite like games that I don't think gets enough love. And so he's running that and a couple of other cool things. So yeah, Story Game Sunday. Very glad to have it back.
Oh, very cool.
Let's go to Giving Me Life. Hello, listeners. I have a couple of things I want to tell you about. The first is that GauntletCon 2018 is coming October 18th through the 21st. GauntletCon is an online convention featuring games, panels, and contests. The event is free for our Patreon supporters, but no fears if you're not a Patreon supporter. There will be a registration process available soon for non-Patreon folks. Please note, however, that Gauntlet Patreon supporters are allowed to register for game events before everybody else. The second thing I want to tell you about is Codex Chrome 2, the newest issue of our fantastic indie RPG zine. It features Veil 2020, a slimmed-down retro-future version of the popular game The Veil, designed to be played with old Cyberpunk 2020 and Shadowrun adventures. Full Throttle, a rules supplement and starter scenario for the outlaw biker gang game 1%er. Body Hack, a one-player journaling game by Akira McGran about learning to live with your new cybernetic body part, and 36 cyberware glitches and malfunctions. To get Codex Chrome 2, just make a $4 or higher pledge on our Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet by the end of July. And back issues, as always, are available on DriveThruRPG. Thanks. It's Giving Me Life. Lowell, what's giving you life?
So this is going to sound a little odd. So I like board games and I like legacy games like Pandemic Legacy. And a number of months ago, this legacy board game came out called Charterstone, which is a legacy game, but it's competitive and it's a village building game where you get roles and you put stickers on the map, and it's very much a Euro game that evolves. And we just played the first session of it on Sunday, and I won't say it was great, but I walked away thinking about it and super excited to play it again because it has that kind of visual design of like Imperial settlers, and you get your little card, you've got a little box you put your character in, and you know that this map is going to change and that you're going to get to maybe become a specialized farmer and stuff. It looks goofy. I'm not sure if it's going to be great, but It's been a long time since I've been just this excited to play multiple sessions of a board game, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. The thing Give Me Life right now is a Switch game, or I think it was a Steam game for a while, but it's on Switch now, called Hollow Knight. It's a platformer about this sort of like strange civilization of like bugs. I guess they're kind of like insects, but they're kind of like creepy, ghostly looking insects. It's so good. Oh my God, this game is good. If you're in our Slack, like our Nintendo Switch channel on the Slack is like consumed by this game right now.
Oh, really?
It's a platformer. It has lots of like Metroidvania qualities to it. They're a little more organic though. It's not like super deliberate and obvious like the, progression gates like you would find in a normal Metroidvania game. But it's got that like really nice, it's got a lot of Dark Souls in it in terms of it has a gloomy quality to it. It has a lot of like implied lore, or there's a lot of lore that's clearly in the world and you have to go find it. It's not spoon fed to you. It's just there. The combat, it is a kind of a combat focused platformer. The combat is very challenging. Dozens and dozens of bosses to fight. Everything. It's just beautiful. The voice work, the music, like it's just a great package. It's only $15, which is fucking nuts because as best I can tell from what I've heard, the game is like 40 hours long and it's just beautifully presented and fun as hell. So yeah, go get that, Switch owners. It's great. And that's our show. Listeners, if you'd like to get in touch with The Gauntlet, we can be found on Twitter at GauntletRPG. We are on G+. Just go to the community section of G+, and search for The Gauntlet. You will find us there. We have a website rather, gauntlet-rpg.com, and we are on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. Lowell, thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for having me again.
And thanks, listeners. Take care.